I used to believe my life had finally settled into something close to peace. After years of chaos, deployments, long nights in field hospitals, and the haunting echo of helicopter blades in my dreams, I thought I'd left that world behind. I was a medic once, a soldier's shadow in places where bullets never stopped flying. But at 42, I was no longer Staff Sergeant Miller. I was just Mom, the woman who packed lunches, reminded her son to take his math homework, and kept her garden alive despite her black thumb. My son, Tyler, was the center of that quiet little universe. He was 15, all restless energy and sarcasm, taller than me now, with shaggy brown hair that refused to stay combed. He had his father's sharp jawline, but his smile, that mischievous grin, was mine. Every morning, he'd grab a slice of toast, sling his backpack over one shoulder, and roll his eyes when I tried to kiss his cheek. "Mom, I'm not a little kid anymore," he'd say. And every morning, I'd kiss him anyway. We lived in a modest two-story house just outside of Denver. Nothing fancy, peeling paint on the porch, a dent in the garage door from when Tyler misjudged a basketball throw, but it was ours. I had rebuilt my life there after my divorce from Mark, my ex-husband. He was a career military officer, and while I respected his service, the years had ground us down. When he made the choice to keep chasing promotions instead of being home, I chose differently. I chose Tyler. Mark and I stayed civil. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. He sent money when he remembered, called Tyler on birthdays, and showed up for Christmas every other year. I carried no bitterness, at least not anymore. The war between us had cooled into silence. And silence was fine with me. I worked at a small urgent care clinic on the outskirts of town. The pay wasn't great, but I liked the rhythm, sprained ankles, sore throats, the occasional broken wrist. Nothing like the blood-soaked tents of Kandahar. At the clinic, lives weren't constantly hanging by a thread. At the clinic, I was just Susan Miller, nurse practitioner, the woman with steady hands and a soft voice. Life was ordinary. Predictable. Safe. Or at least, that's what I told myself. It was a Tuesday in late spring, the kind of day where the sun felt too bright, the air too calm, like the world was holding its breath. Tyler had a big science presentation that morning. He hated public speaking, but he'd practiced all week, muttering about volcano eruptions and tectonic plates while pacing in his room. I teased him that he sounded like a Discovery Channel narrator. He rolled his eyes, but I caught the little smile tugging at his lips. "Knock 'em dead, kiddo," I told him as he grabbed his things. Yeah, he mumbled, though his voice carried that nervous energy I knew so well. He left with his usual swagger, earbuds in, pretending he wasn't secretly terrified. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes, watching him walk down the block toward the bus stop. My chest swelled with pride, with love so sharp it sometimes felt like it would split me open. Everything I had sacrificed, everything I had endured, the sleepless nights overseas, the broken marriage, the endless struggle to keep us afloat, it was all worth it for that boy. If you asked me then what my biggest fear was, I would have said something simple. That Tyler might fail a class. That he'd fall in with the wrong crowd. That he'd grow up and leave me behind. I never could have imagined the truth. That evening, I came home to the sound of Tyler's laughter echoing through the house. He and his friend Jake were playing video games, shouting trash talk at each other from the couch. I stood in the doorway, watching, letting the moment sink into me. This was what peace looked like. Later, after Jake left, Tyler flopped onto the couch with a groan. "How'd it go today?" I asked. He smirked. "Didn't screw it up. Teacher said I did good." I ruffled his hair, and he swatted at my hand. "Mom. You'll thank me someday when you look back and realize how much I embarrassed you." He snorted. "Yeah, sure." It was an ordinary night. We ordered pizza, watched a dumb action movie, argued over whether pineapple belonged on pizza. For the record, it does. Tyler fell asleep halfway through, curled up like he had when he was little, head against my shoulder. I thought, this is my world. My safe, perfect world. And I had no idea how close it was to being ripped apart. 2 days later, the storm came. It was Thursday morning, and I was running late. Tyler was already outside, tossing his backpack into the back seat of a friend's car. I waved from the porch, coffee in hand. He waved back, grinning. I didn't know that would be the last time I'd see that grin for weeks. By the time I finished my shift and got home, the house was too quiet. No backpack by the door. No Tyler sprawled on the couch. I checked my phone. No texts. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe he'd gone to Jake's, maybe practice ran late. But as the hours dragged on, dread began to curl in my gut. By 9 p.m., I was pacing the living room, phone clutched in my hand. I called Jake's mom. "Tyler never came over," she said. "We thought he was with you." Something inside me went cold. I called the police. Reported him missing. They asked the routine questions: what was he wearing, when did I last see him, had he ever run away before? I answered through clenched teeth. Tyler wasn't a runaway. He wasn't reckless. Something was wrong. At midnight, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was low, mocking, and full of venom. "We have your boy." The mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. The voice continued, "Don't call the cops again. Don't tell anyone. If you want to see him alive, you'll do exactly as we say." My knees nearly gave out. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to break free. For one terrible moment, I was back in Afghanistan, hearing the screams of wounded soldiers, the chaos of mortar fire. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was my son. And as the line went dead, I realized two things. The war I thought I'd left behind had just come back to me. And this time I wasn't fighting for strangers. This time I was fighting for my child. The sound of that voice still echoes in my head. Cold. Cruel. Too calm for someone holding a 15-year-old boy's life in their hands. "We have your boy." I couldn't breathe. My throat locked, my chest burned. For a split second, I thought maybe it was some sick prank, some teenager's twisted idea of a joke. But the way he said it, the deliberate tone, the certainty, it was real. They had Tyler. The silence after the call was worse than the words themselves. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the shattered mug on the floor, coffee seeping across the tile like blood. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I tried calling the number back. Straight to voicemail. No answer. And then, like a dam breaking, the fear poured in. I called the police again, this time frantic. They called me. Someone called. They said they have my son. The dispatcher's voice was professional, steady. Too steady. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." What exactly did they say? I repeated the words, choking on them. "We'll send someone over to take a statement," she said. A statement? My voice cracked. "They have my child." "You don't understand, they told me not to call you," they said. "Ma'am, please, remain calm. We'll handle it." But they didn't handle it. By the time 2 officers arrived, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me raw and hollow. They sat in my living room, jotting down notes, nodding like everything was routine. Like this was just another line in their report. "Could be a prank," one of them muttered. "Kids these days." The other shot him a look, but I saw the doubt in his eyes too. I slammed my fist on the coffee table. "Does this sound like a prank to you? My son is missing. He never came home. He's not that kind of kid." "We'll open a missing persons case," the older officer said. "These things usually resolve themselves within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days. My son could already be dead in 2 hours. Their calmness, their rehearsed lines, it infuriated me. I wanted to shake them, to scream in their faces that I'd seen what monsters do to the helpless. I'd patched up children torn apart by shrapnel, seen parents wailing over bodies they couldn't recognize. I knew evil when I saw it. And it had just walked into my home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring again. I tried calling Mark, my ex-husband, but the call went to voicemail. He was stationed out of state, unreachable, as always. I left a message anyway. "Mark, it's Tyler. He's gone. They took him. Call me back. Please." My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The soldier in me wanted to snap into action, draw a map, gather intel, make a plan. But the mother in me was drowning in panic. When the phone finally rang again, my heart nearly stopped. Same number. I answered on the first ring. "Tyler?" But it wasn't Tyler. It was the voice. "You called the cops." My blood froze. I had to. The voice laughed, low and ugly. "You don't listen well, do you? If you want to see him again, you'll stop playing games. Tomorrow, you'll receive instructions. Follow them. If you don't, we'll send you a piece of him to remind you we're serious." No. The word tore from my throat. "Please, he's just a boy." The line clicked dead. I collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor, my whole body shaking. For the first time in years, I felt powerless. Not in combat, not in triage, not when the odds had been stacked against me overseas. Never had I felt fear like this. Because this wasn't some soldier I barely knew. This was my son. The police returned the next morning, asking questions, running through their checklist. Did they demand money? Did they say where to meet? Did they describe the boy's condition? No. None of that. Just threats. Just the promise of pain. The officers exchanged a look I didn't like. Sometimes they don't actually have the kid. Sometimes it's just a scam. I wanted to hit them. Hard. Then explain why my son didn't come home, I snapped. Explain the silence. Explain why a mother's gut is screaming at her that her child is in danger. They didn't answer. That was when something inside me shifted. The fear didn't leave, it never would, but it hardened. Became sharp, like glass. I couldn't rely on them. Not the cops. Not Mark. Not anyone. It was just me. And if they thought I was just some middle-aged nurse they could intimidate, they had no idea who they were messing with. I dug out an old trunk from the back of my closet. It was covered in dust, the latches stiff from years of neglect. Inside was a relic of my past life, a sidearm, locked and unloaded, the one I'd kept when I left the service. Dog tags. A blood-stained field journal. Photographs of faces I hadn't allowed myself to remember. I sat there for a long time, staring at it all. The war I had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. I spent the rest of the day making calls, quiet ones. Old contacts. A buddy from my medic unit who now ran a security company. An ER doctor who owed me favors. I didn't tell them the truth, not yet. I just asked questions. Information about local gangs, about kidnappings in the area. About who might want revenge on my family. Because one thing was clear, this wasn't random. They hadn't just stumbled on Tyler by chance. They had a reason. And I intended to find out what it was. By nightfall, exhaustion dragged at me, but I refused to stop. I spread out everything I had on the dining room table, Tyler's school schedule, the route he usually walked, the people he hung out with. I replayed every detail of the last few days, looking for a clue, a crack in the story. That's when the phone buzzed again. Another call. Same number. I answered, my voice steadier this time. Tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. You'll receive an address. Bring no one. If you do, the boy dies. My hand clenched so tightly on the phone I thought it might snap. Let me hear him, I demanded. Let me hear my son. A pause. Then, faintly, Tyler's voice. Muffled, terrified. Mom? I bit down hard on my lip, forcing myself not to break. I'm here, baby. I'm here. The line cut. I sat there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, and I made a vow. They thought I was weak. They thought fear would paralyze me. They were wrong. I wasn't just a mother. I was a soldier. And God helped them when I came for my son. They told me to be patient. They told me to keep the line open, to stay put, to let the professionals do their job. The officers who came to my house wore the same tired faces I'd seen at the clinic, faces that learned to keep distance so grief didn't eat them alive. They filled out forms, took fingerprints of Tyler's toothbrush for DNA, asked about friends, enemies, habits. It felt like talking to bureaucrats in a hospital intake room while my son sat behind a curtain, bleeding. Ma'am, these cases, the lead detective began, and I stopped listening to the practiced cadence. I needed action, names, fast-tracked resources. Instead I got procedure. We'll coordinate with Juvenile Division and the Cyber Unit. It can take time. Time. The word tasted like sand. I asked for his number, for direct contact, for anything. The detective gave me a card with an extension that went to voicemail. Call us if you hear from them, he said. Keep your phone charged. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the card into the trash and stormed out, but I didn't. I nodded, put the card in my pocket, and watched them leave as if some invisible tether was cut between me and the world. When the front door clicked shut, I felt something inside me harden, the winter-forged steel I'd once buried behind a suburban life. I tried Mark again. No answer. I left 3 messages in a row, simple, raw. Tyler's gone. They called. Call me. No reply. I imagined him in a base office somewhere, surrounded by maps and briefings, fingers hovering over a communication terminal that never rang. Maybe he'd get the messages in a day. Maybe later. Maybe this was another battle I'd have to fight alone. I called the clinic and told my supervisor I needed time off. Samantha, my buddy at work, texted immediately, anything I can do? I swallowed the impulse to unload, to make everyone into soldiers in my private war. Not yet. This had to be precise. The cops left with their checklist and platitudes, but their priorities were clear. A missing child was tragic, but if the kidnappers wanted money and made vague threats, sometimes families negotiated quietly and paid. The department's caseload wasn't built to hunt down professionals who ran organized abductions. They needed evidence, leads, jurisdiction. They needed, goddammit, permission slips and paperwork. I found myself thinking of the men and women I'd treated under tents and in makeshift wards, soldiers who'd come in with their limbs shredded and begged us not to tell their superiors they'd been drinking. In the field you worked with what you had. You improvised. You adapted. Here, in my tidy kitchen with school projects on the counter and a scout badge in a frame, the system asked me to be patient while a clock ran out. So I stopped asking them to move faster and started moving myself. The first thing I did was inventory. If they thought they'd scared me into passivity, they underestimated calculation. I spread out a map on the dining table, folded and refolded until the town streets and back alleys became a lattice of possibilities. I marked Tyler's bus route, the corner where he waited for pickups, the bakery where he sometimes bought muffins. Small things, but patterns reveal themselves in details. Next, I called in favors. Old contacts are a tricky thing, they come with debts and memories. I reached out to Lenny, who used to move supplies on the periphery when we were deployed. He now ran a low-tier security outfit and owed me a favor for patching him up after a broken jaw. He showed up an hour later, the same hulking man with the easel scar across his cheek, carrying an exorbitant, illegal amount of curiosity. No cops? He asked, I scanning the house like a man in a recon sweep. No faith, I said. Tell me what you can find. He tapped his phone and smiled in a way that meant he already was dialed into a web of small-time informants, guys who parked on curbs and noticed license plates. For a price, he could feed me chunks of dirty intelligence, calls from burner phones, sightings near the industrial strip, whispers about a gang with a chip on its shoulder. He promised discretion, then left with a look that said he'd be present on my doorstep tomorrow with anything he could catch. I made other calls, to an doc who'd once slipped me privileged information about a suspect that had saved lives, to a disgruntled parole officer who'd once warned me about a crew operating out of the river warehouses. Answers trickled in, a scrap here, a rumor there. It was the kind of mosaic a woman with something to prove could piece together if she had the patience and the stomach for it. But the truth of it was this: if the police didn't already have a lead, we were likely dealing with professionals. People who planned for contingency, who used untraceable phones and safe houses. People who scared mothers not because they liked cruelty, but because cruelty worked. The address they promised, 10 a.m., the next day, hung in my head like a guillotine. The instructions had been crystal clear: I was to show up alone. Bring no one. If I involved law enforcement, the boy died. If I brought Mark, they would know how to bait us. The rules were meant to isolate me, to make me weigh the life of my son against help that might bring negotiations. They were playing a game with 2 players and 1 pawn. I thought about showing up with the detective trailing me in an unmarked SUV. I thought about using a live feed, a hidden camera, a team of SWAT officers ready to breach. The soldier in me wanted to do it clean, surgical, like a hostage rescue in a movie. The mother in me wanted to throw the rules to the wind and storm through anyone standing in my son's way. The system, however, preferred slow-motion bureaucracy. I shut my eyes and pictured Tyler's face, the stub of a scab on his chin from a skateboarding fall last month, the energy he poured into bad jokes, the way he curled his hand around mine on late-night thunderstorms. I tasted bile. Waiting was not an option. When dawn seeped through the curtains, I had a plan that was equal parts calculation and risk. I would go to the address. I would bring no police. I would follow their instruction as bait, because if they wanted me to be predictable, I would give them predictability, then I would take control. I copied the address onto a slip of paper and folded it into the palm of my hand. I packed a small kit, a bandolier of tool cards, a pressed, legal pistol that had sat in my trunk for years, a tiny first aid kit, and a burner phone. I dressed in plain clothes, jeans, a faded hoodie, sneakers. I didn't want to draw attention, but I needed to be ready for violence. Before I left, I paused at Tyler's room door. His poster of some cheesy rock band hung crooked. His sneakers lay where he'd kicked them off. I brushed my fingers over the bedside table where his wristwatch blinked 12, frozen at the hour he left for school. For a second, the years collapsed, the battlefield and the birthday parties, the combat boots and the baby shoes, and I knew that whatever came next would redefine me. If they thought they'd cornered a grieving suburban mother, they were wrong. If they thought they could play chess with my son's life as a pawn, they were wrong. I slid my pistol into the small of my back and walked out of the house like a woman going to a meeting. The sky was a flat slate. The city smelled faintly of diesel and hot tar. My hands were steady. I drove to the place they'd told me to be. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. A text. From the number that had called. Change of plans. Do not come alone. My fingers tightened on the wheel. The game had already changed. I parked 2 blocks away and killed the engine. For a breathless second, the ordinary world, the garbage cans, the cracked sidewalks, the woman pushing a stroller, felt like camouflage against the life or death small print I'd been handed. I was nervous, but not panicked. That was a useful distinction I'd learned in the field: panic corrodes plans, nervousness sharpens them. The address led me to an industrial strip that smelled of oil and old smoke. Warehouses sat like sleeping beasts, their windows dusted over, roll-up doors rusted. A freight yard hummed in the distance. The place had the kind of isolation kidnappers loved, good for hiding and for making a body disappear. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, hoodie up, sunglasses on, ponytail tucked. I looked like a suburban mom pretending to be invisible. Inside my jacket, the pistol sat cool against my spine like an old ally. I walked with a purposeful slouch, one hand in my pocket, the other light on the fake phone I carried. My steps were practiced, measured, window shopping for weaknesses. I memorized exits, delivery ramps, the angle of the light where a camera might be mounted. My breath came shallow and even. This was reconnaissance. It was what I did. Assess. Adapt. Execute. Halfway down the block, a man in a high-vis vest paused his cigarette and watched me. His gaze flicked over my face and then away. Good. Everyone was the hero of their own story, most people saw me as background noise. That anonymity was a weapon. As I approached the warehouse's loading bay, a skinny dog started to bark, then fell silent. The bay door, number 7, was cracked open by a few inches. A puddle of oil shimmered near the threshold. I crouched, listening. Nothing audible, just the distant thrum of a generator. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pretended to fumble with it. I snapped a quick picture of the door and texted it to Lenny with the message, entry. Any eyes on cams? He replied, 2 minutes. Got you. The delay felt like an eternity. I peered through the crack. Inside, shadow swallowed everything beyond the dim strip of light. Wooden pallets stacked like tombstones. A lone forklift sat idle, the key still in the ignition. Then, a soft sound, a muffled voice, a whisper. It was the kind of sound only a mother would recognize, a coughing sob, the edge of a teenager's whimper. Tyler. The world narrowed. Adrenaline didn't spike, it recalibrated. I moved like a ghost, sliding along the building's side until I found a service entrance. It was locked. My fingers worked a Slim Jim with the same calm urgency I'd used to improvise IVs in a dust-choked tent. The lock gave with a sigh. I slipped inside. The warehouse interior smelled of metal and old sweat. Light slanted through high windows, striping the dust. I kept to the shadows, every muscle tuned. I could hear voices now, coarse and contemptuous, 3 men, easy to handle if I could isolate them. They were gathered near a makeshift table littered with cans and cigarette butts. One was tall, tattoos crawling up his arms, the second was squat, twitchy, the third, lean, with a scar down his cheek, was the one who held the phone during my calls. They laughed about something petty. They were arrogant in the way of men who believe their own invincibility. My plan was simple: distract, separate, and take the closest one down quietly. But plans are only as good as the chaos allows. I saw a stack of crates a few yards from them. With my boots, I kicked a loose metal sheet and let it clatter into the alley. The sound bounced like a bullet through the hollow space. Heads turned. The tall man cursed and stomped toward the noise, leaving the others split. I took my window. I moved like a hunter, soft steps, then a sudden, controlled shove. My hand shot out and grabbed the nearest man by the collar. He didn't have reflexes trained for a woman who'd once practiced hand-to-hand in a tent with a broken night vision scope. He flailed. I slammed him into a crate and felt the wind whoosh out of him. The second man spun, hands reaching for a knife. Close quarters. I used my weight, my years of practical training. Elbow into ribs, sweep the thigh, break balance. The knife flashed, metal catching light, but my fingers found his wrist. Pain was a language I knew how to speak. A twist, a snap, and the knife sailed across the concrete. He held. The third man, Scarface, reacted, fished for a pistol at his hip and fired. Sound erupted. The bullet screeched past where I'd been standing half a heartbeat before. My head snapped back, my ears rang. I dove toward the fallen man, dragging him behind a pallet. Glass crunched somewhere. They shouted. My heart tapped a steady, furious rhythm. Fight or flight isn't a choice when your child's life is on the line. It's all fight. I grabbed the fallen man's collar and forced his head down, smothering his breath with the crook of my arm. I hissed into his ear, my voice a blade. Where is he? I demanded, teeth clenched. He coughed, blood in his mouth, eyes wide with sudden clarity. Warehouse B. Back room. Second door. Codes, he spat out numbers, disjointed, half-formed, then collapsed into a moan. Codes, I repeated, seat of the pants computing every flicker of information. From the corner, Scarface lunged, but Lenny's voice, sharp and behind me, cut him off. I hadn't realized Lenny had come up through the loft. He moved like a boulder, closing distance and colliding with the Scarface, knocking him into a stack of boxes. The element of surprise was no longer mine alone. Get the kid, Lenny barked, eyes bright and dangerous. We crawled through a corridor of crates, my pistol in hand, boots silent but sure. Another door, heavy and steel. The code from the man's mouth had been scrambled, but I had a soldier's intuition for patterns. I tried a combination, 3 numbers, then 2. The lock clicked. Inside, the light was thin. Tyler sat on a cold metal chair, hands bound, eyes hollow and raw. He looked smaller than at home, his cheeks gaunt with stress, his hair matted from sweat. When he saw me, something broke open inside him, a desperation that made his whole face cave in. "Mom," he whispered, voice shredded. How?" I crossed the room in 2 strides and collapsed into him, the relief so violent I could hardly breathe. The smell of fear clung to him. I rubbed his back, fingers checking for injuries, whispering calming things I'd used on soldiers in shock. He was alive. He was alive. But the joy was a flash, immediate and fleeting. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. Voices, many more than the 3 we'd dealt with. It wasn't just a low-level crew, someone had called in reinforcements. A shadow passed under the door, and in that moment, the adrenaline stripped away the warmth of reunion and replaced it with the cold, clean reality of danger. We were not clear. We were trapped on the wrong side of a growing hornet's nest. Lenny looked at me, face a mask of calculation. "Back door, now," he hissed. I grabbed Tyler's hand. His fingers were small and trembling in mine. Behind us, the padlock clanged, too many boots, a chorus of curses. Someone was positioning a rifle where the corridor met the loading bay. I had him. I almost had every damned thing I'd wanted for weeks, and yet the air conspired to steal it back. The world had tightened to the measure of a heartbeat. I could hear my son's pulse echoing in my own ears. I leaned in, whispering into Tyler's ear with the kind of hush that contains commands as much as comfort. "You hold on. Trust me." He nodded, eyes wide and feral with fear and something else, trust edged into survival. I slid my pistol into my palm, felt its weight like a promise. Then the door at the far end of the corridor banged open. A silhouette filled the frame. Tall. Broad shoulders. The silhouette raised an arm, and a scope glinted under the light. I caught breath and tasted iron. And then the world condensed until it was only a decision, an instant, and the sound of a trigger waiting to be pulled. The silhouette in the doorway was a long black line against slatted light. The barrel of a rifle threaded through the gap like a hungry finger. For a frozen fraction of a second the world fell through me, everything slowed to a film reel, Tyler's small face, the glint on the scope, Lenny's jaw set in steel. I felt that terrible, stupid certainty in my bones, 1 bullet, and it was over. Fight training floods your body with simple calculations. Distance. Wind. Angle. The brain turns into math when the chest wants to break. I had a second to decide, sprint for the back and pray the bullet missed, or make a run for the front and risk being picked off in the loading bay. I chose neither. "Drop." I hissed, pushing Tyler behind a stack of boxes as if metal could shield what the air wanted. I hurled a canister, an old spray paint tin, across the room. It skittered, exploded in a hiss of color and sound. The man at the door flinched, muzzle dipping. Lenny moved like a slingshot, fast, ugly, and slammed into the silhouette, taking the man's balance. The shot cracked, but it was fired into the ceiling, kicking plastered dust like confetti. Chaos is a wild thing. It can be a weapon if you understand timing. The men in the corridor swore, cursed, booted, and the single sniper shot was followed by a barrage of shouts and running feet. Lenny hauled an unconscious body, maybe the tall man from earlier, toward the back exit. I grabbed Tyler and we bolted. The back door ripped open to a narrow alley. Rain had started a light, cold sprinkle, turning the oil-dark pavement slick. We could hear them behind us, their boots, the commands, angles closing. I shoved Tyler into the passenger seat of my car, slammed the door, and dove in, tossing the keys as if speed were prayer. Lenny jumped into the trunk and jammed his shoulder against the back as I hammered the gas. Tires cried. We raked down the industrial strip, darting through a maze of delivery drives and chain-link fences like a dog with a scent. A van screeched out from between warehouses and cut us off. Bullets rattled against metal, one blew out a rear window. The world became a spray of light and sound and diesel. I drove like a woman with nothing to lose, past the freight yard, over the bridge, under the highway. I could feel the sting at the base of my skull where adrenaline tightened every muscle. I tasted copper like fear gone metallic. Lenny shouted something about splitting up, pulling them off our tail. I made a fast decision, no. I'd brought him along, and if we split up without a plan, Tyler would be re-exposed to holes I could not afford. We found a dead end by an old service road and skidded into a gravel lot. I killed the engine and we all stared at one another in a breathing, shuddering silence. Tyler looked at me with new lines carved into his face, lines made from prolonged terror. He kept repeating, "Mom, Mom," as if saying it aloud was some lodestone to sanity. Lenny came out of the trunk, wiping rain from his beard. He'd taken a graze to his arm, nothing fatal, but it showed on his jacket where blood had darkened cloth. "Got eyes on us?" I asked. "Not yet," he said, voice low. "They expected you to be predictable. You weren't." That made them sloppy. We sat in the car like people who have seen other people die and decided we would not be them. For a few minutes the world was only our breathing. Then Lenny slid a battered phone across the seat. "There's something else," he said. When they started to panic back there, one of those guys, Scarface, kept muttering something about a date. He also dropped this. He pulled a small plastic wallet from his pocket and set it in my palm. Inside was a photo, a crumpled ID, and a folded receipt. The ID was for a towing company, some small outfit on the edge of town. The photo was older, the edges curled, a man in his 30s with a hard jaw and the same eyes Tyler had. My chest went cold before my brain could finish making the connection. The name on the ID, Mark. My Mark. My ex-husband. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The rain outside seemed to pat at the glass like some steady, indifferent witness. "No," I said. It wasn't a question. Lenny's hand found mine on the seat, steady and warm. Either he's set up, or he's involved. Mark would never. My voice trailed into something that wasn't a memory but a desperate hope. He wouldn't put Tyler in danger. Or would he? The thought was a small needle of ice. What if my son wasn't collateral? What if he was a lever? What if someone wanted to draw Mark out, and Tyler was the only bait big enough? We drove in silence to a safe house Lenny knew, a cheap room above a shuttered shop that smelled of bleach and old coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned the card over in my hands. The receipt had a timestamp from 2 nights ago, the same night Tyler had last been seen. The dates lined up. The little pieces of paper were not proof, but they were a map of questions. I called the number on the towing company ID, hand steady despite the tremor of my heartbeat. A man answered, voice like gravel. "Who's this?" "My name is Susan Miller," I said. "I need to ask about a receipt." I didn't give him time to cut me off with the rehearsed denial some men had. "Did you tow a blue pickup truck 2 nights ago near the riverway?" Time was. Silence. Then a click, like someone dropping a phone into a sink. "No," the man said finally, slow and measured. "We tow all kinds." "What's this about?" "Then why is your ID?" I stopped myself. My fingers tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. I had to be careful. Clumsy accusations would flush whatever truth there was. Because your son was with men who used that ID, Lenny interjected, voice low. They were using any ID they could get their hands on. The man hesitated. Listen, lady. People use fakes. I can't tell you who. You want answers, go to the yard. You'll find your own trouble. We drove to the address. The yard smelled of oil and old metal, like the warehouse had earlier. There was a tow truck there, one of 3, with a fresh scrape on its bumper. I watched a man oil his wrench and then slip into a white pickup that had a dent in the door. He looked up, saw us, and his face tightened. You shouldn't be here, he said, no pleasantries. Where were you 2 nights ago at 10 p.m.? I asked. I was at home, he said. Working on my girl's bike. Lenny stepped forward. You towed a blue truck with a dent on the passenger side. He pushed the man a touch. We saw the scrape. The man's jaw moved. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. I've been towing for 10 years. You got a problem with me, lady? Take it to the cops. Or tell us who hired you, I said. Names. Voices. Anything. He looked at Tyler, then at me. The man's gaze flicked like a fish. All right, he said finally. There was a guy. Scar above his eye, 3 teeth missing on the left. He paid cash. Said to drop a truck by the old river docks and meet him there. Said it was for moving furniture. That's all. I swear. The man's fear was honest enough, but it was the kind of fear that comes from someone who sees more than he wants to and can't unsee it. He was a thread. Pull him enough and maybe the sweater unraveled. That night I lay awake on the cheap mattress with Tyler's hand in mine. He slept fitfully, haunted by images no child should have. I thought of Mark, where he was, what he knew, whether he'd been set up, whether he'd turned into the target that had summoned the monsters. My head ached with the 2 loud questions. The next morning, I broke into his office. I shouldn't have. It was reckless. It was illegal. But the stakes were larger than laws. Mark's house was neat. Everything had its place, the framed medals on the mantel, the photographs of deployments and ceremonies, the suit he wore to briefings hanging like a shadow in the closet. His office gave off the smell of cigar smoke and old paper, and a thin layer of dust sat over an envelope with my name on it, an unpaid birthday card perhaps, or a memory he'd failed to keep. I rifled through his desk drawers with the calm patience of someone who's learned how to find secrets. Under a stack of mission briefings I found a small, sealed manila folder. On the tab, in clean handwriting, was a single word, Crescent. My fingers hovered over the folder for a heartbeat. The name meant nothing to my suburban life, but it meant everything in the language of military ghosts. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of service records, a map with a circled location, and a photograph, old, yellowed, from a courthouse. The face in the photo was not unfamiliar. It was the kind of face you'd seen in a mug shot or an obituaries column. The name written beneath it made my throat go dry, Darren Hale. I didn't know him. Not then. But somewhere, in the penumbra of Mark's past, the name glinted like a warning. And for the first time, the net that had been cast around my son didn't feel random. Someone had history with Mark. Someone who hated him enough to use my son as bait. I closed the folder slowly, the edges of panic and purpose sharpening in me. Outside, rain turned to a steady downpour. Inside, the world I thought I understood shifted on its axis. I sat in Mark's office, the folder spread across the desk like a wound. The rain outside had become a relentless drumbeat, a rhythm I couldn't ignore. The name on the photo, Darren Hale, felt like it was carved into my chest. I whispered it aloud, testing the sound. Darren Hale. Nothing familiar. No flicker of recognition. But the military files, the map, the old courthouse photo, this wasn't random. My ex-husband had been orbiting this man's shadow for years, and now that shadow had fallen across my son. Tyler was asleep upstairs in the spare bedroom, finally finding a fragile kind of rest. Lenny sat in the kitchen, gun on the table, sipping bad coffee. I walked in with the folder and slid it across to him. "You ever heard of Darren Hale?" I asked. He read, slow, deliberate. When he looked up, his eyes weren't calm anymore. They were sharp, like broken glass. "Yeah," he said. "I've heard of him. Hale was court-martialed 10 years ago. Weapons smuggling. A lot of people didn't walk away from the mess he made. Word was, your husband had a hand in putting him away." I felt the room tilt. "You're saying Mark?" "I'm saying your ex put a man in a cage who swore he'd burn the world to get out." "If Hale's out now," Lenny trailed off, but his silence was worse than words. My fingers dug into the edge of the table. So this wasn't about Tyler. Not directly. This was about payback. Hale had spent 10 years rotting with one name in his teeth, Mark Miller. And he had found a way to bite back. But then another thought landed, heavy and cruel: if Hale wanted Mark, why take Tyler? Unless Mark had become too careful, too insulated. Unless Tyler was the weak link. Unless Hale knew using my son was the one thing that would drag both me and Mark into his trap. I needed to know where Mark was. Underscore 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 underscore. I found him the next day, not in his home, but at the Veterans Center he volunteered at. He looked older than the photo on the ID I'd found. More gray in his hair, more weight on his shoulders. But when he turned and saw me, his face went pale. "Susan," he said softly, like a prayer or a curse. I didn't waste time. I grabbed his arm, pulled him into an empty office, and slammed the folder onto the desk. "Why does Darren Hale have my son's name wrapped around his little game?" Mark froze. His hands clenched into fists on the desk. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he warned me. The words sliced through me. "He what?" "He sent a letter last year." I didn't believe it. Said when he got out, he'd take from me what mattered most. I thought it was just noise, Susan. Men like him, they make threats all the time. And you didn't think to tell me? My voice was ice. I didn't think, he stopped himself, shame twisting his mouth. I didn't think he'd go through you. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I leaned over the desk and whispered, "He didn't go through me, Mark. He went through Tyler. Our son." Mark's jaw tightened. He sat heavily in the chair, staring at the folder as though it might swallow him whole. "I put Hale away," he said finally. "He was running guns through the Middle East. People died. Good soldiers. I testified. That's why he hates me." "Then you're the target," I spat. "And Tyler's the bait." He nodded, slow, broken. "Yeah. That's exactly what this is." Back at the safe house, I pieced it together with Lenny. Hale wasn't just after Mark. He was orchestrating something larger, something that involved shipments, old contacts, and scores he wanted settled. "Look at the map," Lenny said, spreading it out on the table. A red circle marked the old river docks, the same location mentioned by the towyard worker. "That's where he moves. That's where we'll find him." Tyler hovered in the doorway, listening despite my gestures for him to go back to bed. His voice was small, but it cut like glass. "Are you going to kill him, Mom?" I looked at him, at the boy who had been dragged through fear no child should know. And for the first time in years, I didn't give him a softened truth. "If I have to," I said. 2 nights later, we were in position. The dock sprawled like a skeleton of rusted cranes and abandoned warehouses. The river lapped against pilings with a steady, dark pulse. Through binoculars, I saw them, men unloading crates from a truck, stacking them inside a corrugated metal warehouse. Guns, no doubt. Hale wasn't just here for revenge, he was rebuilding his empire. And then, at the far end of the pier, I saw him. Darren Hale. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of him. Broad shoulders, hair gone silver, eyes that looked black even in the floodlights. He carried himself like a man who believed the world owed him blood. My chest tightened. This was the man who had touched my son's life with terror. The man who had turned my ex-husband's sins into my nightmare. And he was smiling. The night was black, sliced by the orange glow of floodlights along the river docks. I crouched behind a stack of crates, Tyler huddled at my side, eyes wide. Lenny was beside me, scanning every shadow. Through the binoculars, I saw Darren Hale moving like a predator among his men, guns slung, crates of something heavy being stacked in the warehouse. The bastard was organized, disciplined, and lethal. He had a plan. And now, we were walking into it. I gripped my pistol. Tyler's small hand in mine felt like a lifeline and a warning. "This is it," I whispered. "We go in together. No mistakes." Lenny nodded. We split their attention. "You get Tyler. I'll handle the shooters. Timing is everything." I counted to 3 in my head, then moved. Shadow swallowed us as we crept along the pier. Hale's men didn't notice the subtle flicker of movement behind crates. I could hear Tyler's shallow breathing and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. A shout, one of the men spotted a shadow, and suddenly chaos erupted. Lenny fired first, hitting the nearest man in the shoulder. Bullets ricocheted, and the air smelled of gunpowder and wet wood. I dove behind a crate, pulling Tyler with me. Hale stepped out from the warehouse, rifle in hand, eyes scanning. When he spotted us, a smile twisted across his face. "You must be the mother," he called. "Brave, or stupid? Let's find out which." The world narrowed. I had seconds, not minutes. I moved, low and fast, dragging Tyler toward a side door I'd spotted. Hale raised his rifle. Lenny shouted, drawing fire. I fired once, low and precise, hitting the wooden support near Hale's feet. The shot was enough to unbalance him. I yanked Tyler into the doorway, slammed it behind us, and bolted into the narrow interior corridor. Hale cursed, switching targets between me and Lenny. Inside the warehouse, the crates formed a labyrinth. We ducked, we dodged, bullets tearing through wood and metal around us. I found an old service ladder and motioned Tyler up. He scrambled, fear and trust mingling in his eyes. Finally, we reached a small office overlooking the dock floor. Tyler clung to me as I peered out. Hale's men were regrouping. He was furious now, his empire disrupted by a mother who refused to play by his rules. "This ends tonight," I whispered to myself. I grabbed a flare from my bag, lit it, and hurled it toward the dock floor. Smoke and fire erupted, blinding the men and giving Lenny cover to take them down systematically. I could see Hale, still standing, but now vulnerable, his expression unreadable. I climbed down the ladder and faced him directly. Tyler hidden behind crates, Lenny covering the exit. Hale laughed, cold, cruel, and I felt the last of my fear transform into a strange calm. It was time for payback. The final confrontation was swift. Hale charged, weapon swinging. I dodged, pistol trained, and we danced a dangerous rhythm of strikes and counters. A single clean shot disarmed him. Lenny tackled him to the ground. I leaned down, staring Hale in the eyes. "You took my son. You thought I'd be afraid. You were wrong," I said, voice icy. "This ends now." Hale spat blood, sneered, and I realized the fight wasn't just physical, it was every fear, every anger, every betrayal I'd bottled up for weeks. By the time the police sirens arrived, Hale was subdued, his men arrested or incapacitated. Tyler ran into my arms, crying and shaking, but alive. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet victories. Tyler's wounds were minor, bruises and cuts, nothing that would leave lasting scars. He clung to me, whispering, "I knew you'd come." I let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. Lenny watched quietly, always alert, always ready. Mark arrived shortly after Hale was in custody. He looked older, guilt written across his face. I didn't know how to protect him," Mark said, voice hollow. "You didn't protect him," I said, holding Tyler. "I did. And I'm done waiting for anyone else to act. That's my revenge." Mark's guilt was palpable, but I didn't want reconciliation, I wanted acknowledgement. He nodded, understanding the lines had been drawn clearly. Weeks later, I sat alone in my apartment, the city quiet outside. Tyler played in the living room. Hale was behind bars, his empire dismantled, his threats neutralized. I had taken control, acted when the system failed, and proven to everyone, most importantly to myself, that a mother's revenge is precise, relentless, and unstoppable. I kept a small notebook on the table, a record of names, plans, and strategies. Not for revenge anymore, but as a shield. Because the world had shown me one truth: if you wait, it can destroy what you love. If you act, you can reclaim it. Tyler looked up at me and smiled, small and tentative. "Can we just go get ice cream?" I laughed, ruffling his hair. The adrenaline, the fear, the fury, all still there, but for now, it was quiet. I nodded. "Yeah. Ice cream." And for the first time in weeks, I let the tension fall away. Revenge had been served. Survival, ours. And the lesson was burned into me forever: underestimate a mother, and you will regret it.